She's pretty, Daddy. The obese bride was mocked until the mountain man's daughter called her mama. The spring sun poured through the stained glass windows of St. Mary's Church, but for Millicent Millie Fairweather, the light felt like a cruel spotlight. She stood at the altar in a wedding dress, stitched to fit her wide frame lace, stretched across a body that weighed over 300 pounds. Her cheeks burned with shame as whispers darted through the pews like knives. "Poor Edgar," someone muttered loud enough for her to hear, "stuck with a cow in a wedding gown." Another snickered, "Looks more like a tent than a bride." Millie's hand shook as she clutched her bouquet. She had agreed to this marriage to save her family from crushing debt, but standing here beside Edgar Pemberton, his lip curled in open disgust, she felt less like a bride and more like a prisoner paraded for mockery. The humiliation pressed heavier than the corset digging into her ribs. She blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. Was this what her life was destined to be, an endless performance of shame? Then, piercing the tension like a bell's chime, came a small, clear voice from the back of the church. "She's pretty, Daddy." Every head turned. A little girl, no older than 6, stood pointing at Millie with innocent certainty. Beside her loomed a mountain of a man, Jeremiah "Jer" Mountain Heart, a reclusive woodworker from Pinecrest Ridge, towering at 7 feet, with broad shoulders and hair falling to his collar. The girl tugged at his hand, her golden curls bouncing as she repeated, louder this time, "She's so pretty, I want her to be my mama." Gasps rippled through the pews. Millie's throat tightened. For the first time in years, someone had looked past her size and seen something beautiful. Millie Fairweather had always known she was different. Since childhood, her round figure and soft face had made her the target of cruel jokes. Fat Millie was what the schoolboys called her, and though she grew into a skilled seamstress with a gentle spirit, the name stuck like a stain she could never wash out. Now, at 25, she was being traded like livestock. Her father's debts had forced her into an arranged marriage with Edgar Pemberton, son of a wealthy landowner. Edgar had agreed only under his father's insistence, his pride gnawed raw by the idea of marrying a woman who drew ridicule with every step. At the altar, Edgar's disdain was barely veiled. He shifted uncomfortably, sneering each time Millie's sleeve rustled against his arm. When the minister asked if he took this woman as his wife, Edgar muttered under his breath, "Lord help me," earning a ripple of laughter from the pews. Millie's heart cracked. Even on this day, even dressed in white, she was nothing more than the butt of a joke. She wished she could vanish into the floorboards, but before she could crumble, a child's voice rang out, piercing the cruelty like sunlight through storm clouds. "She's pretty, Daddy." The congregation twisted around, stunned. At the back stood little Sarah Mountain Heart, her blue eyes wide with innocent conviction. The girl's words hung in the air like a hymn, sweet and unshakable. Edgar flushed red with anger. "Keep your brat quiet," he barked, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Jeremiah Mountain Heart rose slowly to his full height, towering above the pews. Silence fell as he stepped forward, his presence alone commanding attention. His deep voice rolled like distant thunder. "My daughter speaks only the truth. She sees kindness and beauty where the rest of you are too blind." Millie's breath caught. This stranger, this mountain of a man, was standing for her when no one else ever had. Edgar sneered, his voice dripping venom. "Beauty? She's a pig dressed in lace, and I'm the poor fool forced to marry her." The insult burned, but before Milly could lower her head, Jerry's gaze locked on Edgar, cold and steady. "And you, sir, are uglier than any creature I've hunted, because rot of the heart shows clearer than any face." Gasps filled the church. For once the whispers were not about Milly, but about the audacity of this man who dared to shame Edgar Pemberton in his own wedding. Milly's hands trembled as Sarah wriggled free of her father's grasp and skipped up the aisle. She stopped in front of Milly, small chin tilted with surprising courage. "Do you want to be my mama?" she asked, her voice ringing out clear and pure. "Because I think you'd be the best one." Tears spilled down Milly's cheeks. She knelt, her veil falling forward as she whispered, "Sweetheart, you really think so?" Sarah nodded fiercely. "You're pretty, and you smile kind. That's what a mama should be." The church was breathless, frozen in shock, and in that moment, Milly felt something shift inside her, a crack in the wall of shame she had built all her life. For a heartbeat, the church seemed suspended in silence, every eye fixed on the unlikely trio at the altar. The humiliated bride, the towering woodsman, and the little girl clinging to Milly's skirts as though she had already claimed her as mother. Milly's voice shook but carried, "I will not marry a man who despises me." She turned to Edgar, her eyes shimmering with tears, but her spine straightened by a newfound resolve. "I will not live my life as a joke for your amusement. I would rather walk away alone." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Women covered their mouths. Men muttered in disbelief. No one defied the Pembertons. Edgar sputtered, his face blotched crimson. "You ungrateful sow! Do you think anyone else would want you?" But before his venom could spill further, Jeremiah Mountainheart moved down the aisle, each step reverberating through the wooden floorboards. He stopped at Milly's side, his height dwarfing Edgar, until the proud young man seemed to shrink into nothing. "She will not walk away alone," Jerry said, his deep voice steady as bedrock. He bent one knee in almost comical sight, a giant stooping in reverence, and looked up into Milly's astonished eyes. "My daughter has chosen you, and I trust her heart. Come with us, to Pinecrest, to a home where no one will mock you." Sarah tugged Milly's hand, whispering urgently, "Please say yes. We need you." Milly's world tilted. Could she leave everything behind? The shame, the debts, the jeering faces? For so long she had believed her only future was suffering quietly in the shadow of others' contempt. And here was a child offering unconditional love, and a man offering protection without judgment. She nodded slowly, whispering, "Yes, I'll come." The church erupted half in outrage, half in awe. The minister cleared his throat, uncertain whether to bless or condemn. Edgar stormed down the aisle, shoving past parishioners, his pride shattered. But Jerry merely gathered Sarah into one arm, offered Milly the other, and together they walked from the church into the spring sunlight. The journey to Pinecrest Ridge took 2 days by wagon. Jerry's horse strained against the climb, hooves steady on the rocky trail. Milly sat beside Sarah on the seat, her gown bundled awkwardly, the veil tucked away. Sarah chattered endlessly, asking about Milly's favorite foods, whether she liked stories before bed, whether she could bake pies. Each question pierced Milly's heart with both sweetness and sorrow. "This child truly wants me," she thought. daring to smile despite the ache of leaving everything she'd known. At night, they camped beneath tall pines. Jera built a fire with practiced hands, setting a kettle of stew to simmer. Millie offered to help, but he shook his head. "You've carried enough weight today. Rest. Eat." She obeyed, surprised by the gentleness in his tone. No man had ever spoken to her with such quiet respect. As she lay beneath a blanket, Sarah curled against her side. Millie listened to the wind in the trees and the steady crackle of fire. For the first time in years, her body relaxed, unguarded. She whispered a prayer not of desperation, but of gratitude. By the second afternoon, the trees parted to reveal Pinecrest Ridge. Nestled against the mountainside stood Jerry's cabin, a massive structure of hewn logs built solid against storms. Smoke curled from a chimney, and the smell of pine resin filled the air. Sarah clapped her hands. "We're home!" Millie's breath caught. It wasn't just the size of the cabin, though it was larger than she expected. It was the small touches. A swing hung from the porch, a patch of flowers planted at the steps, a painted carving of a mother bear and her cubs above the door, signs of love, signs of a family waiting to be whole again. And for the first time, Millie wondered perhaps she truly belonged here. The cabin on Pinecrest Ridge was unlike anything Millie had imagined. She had expected a rough hut, dark and empty. Instead, the place felt alive, sturdy beams, polished smooth by Jerry's hands, shelves lined with jars of berries and dried herbs, a rocking chair near the hearth. Though everything was built to fit a man of Jerry's immense size, the details revealed tenderness. Sarah's drawings pinned to the walls, a small dollhouse carved from pine, quilts folded neatly at the foot of her bed. "Papa built all this," Sarah said proudly as she tugged Millie inside, "and now it's ours." Millie's throat tightened. She had never been welcomed so openly anywhere. The child's faith in her, so unshaken, was like sunlight melting frost. That first evening, Millie offered to cook. Jerry raised a brow, clearly skeptical of turning his kitchen over, but he nodded. Millie tied an apron around her wide waist and set to work. She rolled out biscuits with practiced hands, roasted rabbit Jera had snared, and made gravy rich with herbs. When she placed the food on the table, Jera's eyes softened. He waited until Millie sat before serving himself. "Ladies eat first in this house," he said. Her cheeks flushed. No one had ever treated her with such courtesy. She lifted a biscuit, hands trembling slightly, and tasted her own cooking in this new place. Sarah squealed with delight, butter dripping down her chin. That night, Jared cleared the dishes while Millie dried them. Their fingers brushed once, and both pulled back awkwardly, hearts beating faster than they wished to admit. In the days that followed, Millie slowly carved a place in their lives. She taught Sarah to sew small stitches on scraps of cloth, laughing when the girls' lines wobbled crooked. She swept the cabin, humming hymns under her breath. She filled the space with scents of bread baking, stews simmering, pies cooling on the sill. Jerry watched quietly, his great frame leaning against the door frame as he returned from chopping wood. He said little, but Millie often caught him gazing at her with an expression she couldn't decipher, something between awe and sorrow, as though he saw more than she realized. One afternoon, as Sarah napped, Jera asked Millie to step outside. "I'll show you how to split logs," he said. She laughed nervously. "I'm not built for that." "You're built for more than you think," he replied gently, pressing the axe handle into her hands. His calloused fingers lingered on hers for a moment too long. The axe was heavy, but with Jerry guiding her stance, Millie raised it high and brought it down. The log cracked clean in two. She gasped, surprised at her own strength. "There," Jerry said, his voice low, approving. "Told you?" Millie's heart fluttered not from the effort, but from the warmth in his eyes. No one had ever believed in her before, not like this. At night, after Sarah was tucked into bed, Millie sat by the fire mending clothes. Jerry worked silently at his carving, the sound of knife on wood steady and sure. Sometimes he would hand her small figures, a bear, a bird, once even a plump little woman with kind eyes. Millie held it carefully, realizing it was her likeness. "She looks happy," Millie whispered. "She is," Jerry replied, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Because she's home." Her eyes stung. She had never thought of herself as beautiful, much less happy. Yet here, in this cabin with these two souls, something fragile and precious was growing. One evening, as snow whispered against the shutters, Sarah curled into Millie's lap. "Mama," she murmured sleepily, the words slipping out as naturally as breath. Millie froze, tears spilling down her cheeks. She kissed the child's golden hair and whispered, "Yes, darling, Mama's here." Across the fire, Jerry looked up, his expression unguarded for the first time. A smile broke through his usual solemnity, tender and full of hope. And in that quiet, firelit moment, Millie felt the weight of years of ridicule begin to lift. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could truly belong. For a few blissful weeks, Millie believed the cruel voices of Willowdale had been left behind in the valley. She mended curtains, planted herbs by the porch, and listened to Sarah's laughter echo through the pines. But word travels swiftly through small towns, and soon trouble came climbing up the mountain. It began with whispers. Pastor Avery, a kind soul who occasionally rode up with supplies, warned Jerry that Edgar Pemberton had not taken his humiliation quietly. "He tells anyone who'll listen that you stole his bride," the pastor said. "Claims Millie's no true wife, just a stray you dragged into your cabin." Millie's face burned. She folded her hands tightly in her lap, shame pressing heavy against her chest. "He's not wrong," she whispered. "We never—" "You are my wife," Jerry interrupted, his deep voice firm. "By word, if not by paper, and that's enough." But was it? Millie wondered. In the eyes of the town, she was still the fat girl who ruined her family, the woman who couldn't even manage a proper wedding. The gossip worsened when Pike, one of Edgar's drinking companions, rode up with two men. They lingered at the edge of the clearing, smirking at Millie as she carried water from the spring. "Well, well," Pike drawled, "looks like the mountain man took himself a prize sow. Tell me, sweetheart, does he keep you for the cooking or the warmth at night?" Millie's cheeks flamed, but before she could retreat, Jerry's shadow loomed. He seized Pike's collar in one massive hand, lifting him half off his horse. "You'll not speak her name again," Jerry growled. "Not here, not anywhere." The men spat curses, but retreated down the trail. Still, their laughter rang in Millie's ears long after they were gone. That night, Jerry was restless, pacing the floor as the fire burned low. Millie sat quietly, Sarah asleep in her lap. When Jerry finally spoke, his voice was raw. "I lost my wife 2 winters ago," he confessed. "Fever took her fast. Since then, the town has called me cursed, a giant with no woman raising a child alone. When Sarah called you Mama in that church?" He paused, rubbing a hand over his face. "It broke me, Millie, because I knew she was right. But I fear I've dragged you into a fight you didn't ask for." Millie's heart ached. She saw not just the giant everyone else feared, but a man scarred by grief, struggling to believe he deserved happiness. "You didn't drag me," she whispered. "I chose to come." He looked at her then, eyes blazing with something between gratitude and despair. But he said nothing more, retreating into silence. The next morning, Millie found a letter nailed to the cabin door. The handwriting was Edgar's. "You can play house with that brute, but you'll never escape what you are. The town will never call you wife. Come back, or watch the law take him down." Her hand shook as she read it. When Jerry saw the letter, he tore it in half with a snarl. "Let him come. I'll break him if he tries." But Millie's doubts gnawed at her. Could Jer's strength alone shield her from the world's scorn? And what if Edgar truly had the law on his side? That night, lying awake while snow tapped at the shutters, Millie whispered to herself, "Maybe Edgar is right. Maybe I'll never be enough." Yet when she turned, Sarah was curled against her, tiny hand gripping Millie's sleeve even in sleep. And Jerry sat watch by the fire, his rifle across his knees, his eyes steady. In that fragile, flickering light, Millie realized the truth. She had already found something far stronger than the town's approval. She had found a family worth fighting for. The attack came at dusk. Millie was kneading bread while Sarah hummed by the fire when the sound of hooves thundered up the slope. Jerry's head snapped toward the window, his jaw hardening. He reached for his rifle. Outside, torches bobbed in the falling snow, half a dozen riders led by Edgar Pemberton himself. Their shouts broke the mountain silence. "Mountain Heart!" Edgar bellowed. "Bring out the sow you stole from me. She's mine by right." Millie's stomach twisted. For years, she had endured the jeers of men like Edgar, shrinking back, hiding in silence. But now, Sarah's wide eyes turned to her, trembling. "Stay behind me," Jerry said, pushing Millie gently toward the hearth. Then he strode onto the porch, the giant in him rising like a wall of stone. "You'll not take one step closer," he growled. Edgar sneered, lifting a pistol. "You can't keep her. The law's on my side, and the whole town knows it." Jerry's rifle stayed steady. But Millie saw the danger plain. If this ended in blood, Sarah would carry the scar forever. Her pulse roared in her ears. For the first time, she realized it wasn't enough to let Jerry fight alone. She stepped out beside him. The cold bit her cheeks, but her voice carried clear. "No, Edgar, you don't own me. You never did." The riders murmured, startled by her defiance. Edgar's face contorted. "You think anyone will believe you? Look at you. You're nothing." "I am everything to this family," Millie cut in, her words trembling but fierce. "To Sarah, I am mother. To Jeremiah, I am wife. And to myself, I am done being your joke." Her declaration rang across the ridge. Even Edgar's men shifted uneasily, glancing at one another. Jerry's hand tightened on his rifle. "You heard her," he said. "Now ride down this mountain before I make you." For a long, charged moment, Edgar's pride battled against the truth burning in Millie's eyes. Then, with a snarl, he jerked his reins. "This isn't over," he spat, retreating into the dark with his men. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of torches dying in the snow. Jared turned to Millie, wonder softening the iron in his face. "You stood with me," he whispered. Millie's chest heaved, her fear melting into something fiercer. "I won't ever hide again," she said. "Not when I've finally found where I belong." And for the first time, the mountain seemed to echo back her words, not with scorn, but with strength. The cabin glowed with firelight, a fortress of warmth against the howling wind outside. Sarah slept curled in Millie's lap, her tiny breaths steady and soft. Millie stroked the child's golden hair, her own heart finally easing after the storm of the evening. Across the hearth, Jarrah set aside his rifle and lowered himself into the chair opposite her. For the first time that night, the weight slipped from his shoulders. He watched the two of them, his daughter safe, the woman who had chosen them both alive and unbroken, and something like peace settled over his face. "You're safe here," he said quietly. The words carried more than comfort. They were a vow. Millie met his gaze, her throat tightening. "Home," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "You've given me a home." Jerry leaned forward, his enormous hand covering hers. His touch was steady, grounding. "No," he said, "we've built it together." For a long while neither spoke. The crackle of the fire and the faint whistle of the wind filled the silence. Outside, the mountain kept its secrets. But inside the cabin, love was no longer a fragile ember. It was a flame, steady and real. Yet as Millie laid her head against Jerry's shoulder, one thought lingered like the echo of the storm. The world below the ridge would not forgive easily. Edgar's pride was wounded, the town's gossip unrelenting. Could their love withstand the weight of judgment waiting beyond these walls? Millie closed her eyes, holding Sarah close, and decided she did not care. For tonight they were a family. For tonight love had won. Stories like Millie, Jer, and little Sarah remind us that love is not measured by appearances or by the world's approval, but by the courage to stand together when it matters most. Sometimes it takes the innocent eyes of a child to see beauty where others see none. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from tonight? Do you still believe in love that can defy judgment and fear? If your answer is yes, then don't leave just yet. The next story I have for you is Waiting, and it may touch your heart even more deeply.